everyone. Welcome to my first movie review. The honor of the first movie goes to a particular favorite of mine that came out in 2014, directed by Christopher Nolan, called Interstellar. The movie opens up on a corn farm, one of the last species unaffected by a plague called the blight. The blight is affecting the world, and it seems to be some kind of disease that's infected and killed a whole bunch of different plants. And it had apparently destroyed virtually all the other crop species besides corn. When the neighbor burns his field because of the blight, the grandfather character, Donald, played by, he's from Third Rock from the Sun, John Lithgow, he remarks that it's the last harvest of okra. I guess it's implied that it's the last harvest ever, because the species has been so ravaged by the blight. Assuming almost everything else had suffered like that, humans would be in starvation mode. When all of our crops die, it means we can't feed ourselves, and then there's widespread starvation. And you can see this in the world in Interstellar. At a baseball game, Donald laments that they have to eat popcorn, saying that at a ball game it's unnatural. He wants a hot dog, which apparently isn't economically feasible anymore. If all the crop foods are dying off, it follows that it isn't really feasible to feed huge animal farms either. There's no hot dogs because it's too expensive to raise pigs. There also seems to be a huge upswing in the frequency of dust storms, like the one that forces them home from the baseball game. The dust literally cakes their houses. It's spread all over their windowsills and their porches. It covers everything inside their houses. It gets on the floors. It's on the walls, on all their stuff, like pictures on the wall and furniture. They even have a normalized emergency response to the storms with all of the gear, like breath masks and handkerchiefs and eye protection and stuff like that. And that implies that these dust storms happen often and they can get really bad. I like this because it's a cool little detail into the ecology of the world of Interstellar. If the blight is killing off all sorts of different plants, not just crop plants, the collective lack of roots from all of these plants, dying and rotting away, the lack of roots would lead to a widespread destabilization of the soil. The roots hold the soil together, and so without them, there's a lot more loose soil that easily gets swept up by the wind into dust. And you see that in the world in Interstellar, which I think is a really nice touch. It's really kind of a scientifically literate reference to ecology. I think it's neat. Anyway, the main character, Cooper, who's played by Matthew McConaughey, is at a parent-teacher meeting with teachers at his kid's school. And he's talking to them, and he mentions that there's no more armies. And later on, when he's talking to the robot TARS, he says that there's no Marines anymore. This implies that there's been some kind of drastic reorganization of the world's priorities to deal with the blight. If the blight is afflicting the world so badly that there's no such thing as armies anymore, that means that the blight is an existential level threat that's united all of mankind, more or less, or at least driven them to a ceasefire to deal with a greater problem. It's in that way it's kind of similar to alien organisms coming from outer space and invading Earth. And because they represent some other for all of us on Earth, that allows us all to unite into an in-group of the human species. And so I can see thematic parallels between aliens and the blight. As far as the logic of the movie is concerned, it's a pretty damned good reason to want to escape Earth and settle a safer and more hospitable world. But is the blight feasible? It seems to be some kind of bacteria or fungus that affects tens or maybe hundreds of species, if not, thousands of species of plants. In reality, most pathogens only have the biochemical equipment, like the enzymes and the internal conditions and stuff like that, to infect just a small range of species. Malaria, for example, only infects mosquitoes and humans. Most animal species, like bird flu or swine flu, only affect that animal and its closest kin, which is why you don't get the same diseases your cat gets, or your dog. But in cases where humans and huge numbers of animals are kept in dirty conditions, and they're all in close contact for long enough, kind of like an industrial agriculture farm, these pathogens can mutate, and they can make the leap from pig to human, or chicken to human, or whatever it happens to be. Malaria evolved to exist in humans and mosquitoes, And some strains of swine flu evolved to exist in pigs and humans. Pigs and humans aren't even that different, genetically and physiologically speaking. Now, I know all of these are animal diseases, and plant diseases are different, because fungal infections often infect plants really badly, and that can be an extremely destructive event, a fungus infecting a crop or a forest. Or for the blight to be able to infect so many different species, it would need to be highly mutable, susceptible to frequent mutations and like rapid divergence into new species with like new qualities and stuff like that. This raw mutability would give it the variability necessary to infect a huge number of species. If you're a pathogen and you're trying to infect an organism, you have to face its immune system, and its immune system has certain defenses. And if you can evolve a mechanism to get around that defense, okay, good for you. But it may have taken you a really long time to get around that one defense. You have maybe spent 10 million years evolving a way to infect this one species. Well, what if your genes had this inherent factor that made them extremely mutable, and so that all of your descendants and your lineages that spawn and break off and branch apart, what if all of them could all rapidly, like within the same time frame, infect a huge number of other species, and just simultaneously infect entire ecosystems and take them all down overnight? I mean, it's not impossible. Destroying all those species within a timescale of weeks or months or years or even decades, I mean, that implies some kind of pathogenic aggressiveness that's unimaginable. I don't see how it's impossible, it just seems really unlikely. Later on in the film, when Cooper has been entangled in this hidden NASA base, and they're talking to him and informing him of all these missions, the Lazarus missions, he learns, that humans have been sent through the gravitational anomaly, through a wormhole. He also learns that they have a plan B in the form of a so-called population bomb. The bomb, which is a weird name for it, is it's literally 5,000 fertilized eggs kept in cryostorage. And so this is designed to be brought to the planet, and the fertilized eggs are designed to be grown into embryos and raised up into people, and they come into their own as a viable gene pool. Anne Hathaway's character, Dr. Brand, says that genetic diversity is a big problem for potential space colonies, and the population bomb approach solves it. And it does, that's true. The genetic diversity is designed into the 5,000 embryos, which is, it's actually a really brilliant scientific approach. The only downside is that a number of adults would be required to care for the infants, to raise them up through adolescence and educate them to be capable members of the colony. This isn't impossible given the adults already on the mission, but it would require a pretty large number of adults to care for 5,000 kids. Although it's also possible that the 5,000 embryos are grown in like staggered sequences. Like maybe the first 500 are grown into people, and they form the first generation of the colony, so to speak. And 5 years later, they grow another, and then 5 years later, they grow another. And so you have these sequential generations coming out of the same population bomb. And after 10 of these generations, you've depleted all the genes in the generation bomb, but you've sustained 10 generations of a gene pool with healthy genetic variety. And now you have an interbreeding population of maybe thousands of people who were born into generations both naturally and from the population bomb thing, from the frozen embryos. That by the time you're done with the population bomb, you have a colony with a population of 50,000 or 100,000 or, 250,000 or something crazy like that. And so it's a pretty cool idea for forming a legitimate, stable, genetically healthy colony. I appreciate how the film handled the idea of the Lazarus missions. I mean, they were pretty much suicide missions, undertaken by extremely brave astronauts, who knew that they were risking their lives and probably dooming themselves. In the movie, the astronauts of the Lazarus missions follow a Dr. Mann through the wormhole, and Dr. Mann is played by Matt Damon, which is a pretty cool surprise that you get later on in the film. So as all of these individual astronauts go through the wormhole, in their individual ships to their individual planets, Their mission is to land and explore and see if they can find any way for humans to live there, any way for humans to colonize the planet and call it their new home. You remember, because Earth is dying, and so the whole motive here is to find a new home, a new habitable planet for the human species. I mean, this is a pretty amazing undertaking, if you think about it. As the astronauts land on their planets and do their exploration and their search for life and habitability and stuff like that, they're supposed to send back like a green signal, like a positive signal or a negative signal. The positive says, yeah, there's life here. This planet's good. You can come here and settle. And the negative signal says, no, like, don't come here. This is an inhospitable planet. We'll all die if we come here. And so, that's the stakes. And if there's no signal that comes back, or if it's a negative signal, it's assumed that astronaut is pretty much doomed. That's the bravery part of the mission, as they say in the movie. When they're talking to Matt Damon's character, Dr. Mann, he's talking about all these organics and cool chemicals that he found, and it all turns out to be fabricated. It's all like a lie, because he landed on a planet that was inhospitable. It was an icy, barren wasteland. There was no life and pretty much no feasibility for life. But he's human, so he was scared, and he wanted to be saved. And so he faked his signal. He went so far as destroying his helpful little TARS robot, although it had a different name that I can't remember at the moment. He destroyed it so that it wouldn't, squeal on him, so that it wouldn't relay a hidden message like, hey, this guy's crazy. He just wants to get saved. Don't waste resources coming to this planet. No, he destroyed it so it couldn't do that. All right, I'm getting a little bogged down in the plot and moving away from the biology. I thought it was fascinating how they sent these doctors as like little biological probes almost to the planets to test their atmospheres and their ecologies and see if humans could live there. That's a really fascinating and kind of brave pioneer, like space frontier pioneering kind of idea to me. I think it's really, really kind of badass. And then you find out at the very end that the planet Dr. Brand wanted to go to in the first place was a habitable planet that people could live on. Because the movie ends with a scene of Dr. Brand having been more or less saved by being dropped on that planet, and she's attending to the grave of the astronaut who landed there in the first place, but died from some mysterious circumstance that we just don't know about. The movie doesn't cover it. The film leaves us with this message that Dr. Brand is like the first cell of the human superorganism that reached through time and space to land on this one lonely world. And because it happens to be habitable and they found it, they discovered it, and they're like, okay, we're going here. This is humanity's new home. She's almost like a beacon of sorts. And the whole collective human superorganism that survives is going to be following her through space and time to this planet to establish that planet as the new biosphere to host the human species. I think these are really kind of lofty themes, and I think it's really cool, and I think it's one of the things that make this movie really worth watching. Now, traveling through a wormhole is a lot trickier. I'm much more of a biologist than I am a physicist, so I'm sketchy on the technical details of wormholes, but I do wonder how humans would fare going through such a thing in real life. Science says that wormholes are a technical possibility, but everything I've heard suggests that they collapse the instant anything attempts to go through them. Like you send a particle through a wormhole, and even that little particle disrupting whatever it is that is the wormhole just causes it to collapse. The wave function collapses and the thing just disappears. The wormhole in Interstellar is, it's implied to be artificially constructed, because apparently it stayed open for 48 years, even after having things and people sent through it. Presumably, anyone going through a real wormhole would die in the attempt, severed or crushed or something by the gravity anomaly as it collapses instantaneously. All in all, I really like this movie. I really liked Interstellar. I thought it was a brilliant movie. It sticks to the science pretty well, and as far as biology is concerned, everything it portrays, like the blight and the hardships of interstellar colonization, are pretty much on point. The blight, I think, is a feasible threat, although I do think it's pretty unlikely that anything that aggressive, that pathogenic, that mutable would spontaneously emerge or evolve or something like that. If anything like the blight were to affect us in real life, I imagine it would have to be an organism with a modified or entirely synthetic genome. Interstellar is exciting, thought-provoking, and it adheres well to known biological and ecological principles. The only thing I'm not sure about is how well humans would fare actually going through a wormhole in real life. So I'll withhold judgment until I see an attempt in real life.
Would you like to support the BioLogic podcast? It's super easy. When you open a new episode, press the like button or share it with your friends. If you aren't subscribed, you should hit the subscribe button so you can enjoy a new episode every week. You can also peruse our official store, which has a ton of cool stuff like hand-designed t-shirts, hoodies, and stickers. All the links you need are in the description section below.